Imagine a chessboard, but instead of pawns and kings, you have over 200,000 soldiers, cannons thundering like a violent storm, and the fate of Europe hanging in the balance. This isn't a game. This was the reality on June 18, 1815, just south of Brussels, at a place called Waterloo. This one day would decide everything. So, how did we get here? Picture this. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had conquered most of Europe, was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. Everyone thought the wars were over, but Napoleon? He was not one to sit quietly. In a move that shocked the world, he escaped, landed in France, and rallied the nation behind him in just a few weeks. This period is famously known as the 100 Days. The other European powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, were not about to let him rebuild his empire. They formed the Seventh Coalition and declared war, not on France, but on Napoleon himself. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown. On one side, we have Napoleon, a military genius, leading his French army, the Armée du Nord. His troops were veterans, fiercely loyal to their emperor. They believed he was invincible. On the other side, we have the Allied army, a diverse mix of British, Dutch, Belgian, and German soldiers, commanded by the Duke of Wellington. Wellington was a brilliant defensive strategist, known as the Iron Duke. He was calm, collected, and had a knack for picking the perfect ground to fight on. And then there's the third major player, the Prussian army, led by the tenacious old warrior, Gebhard von Blücher. The Prussians had been defeated by Napoleon just 2 days earlier at the Battle of Ligny, but were determined to rejoin the fight. The battlefield itself was a rolling landscape of ridges and valleys. Wellington chose his position wisely, placing his main force behind a long ridge. This simple geographical feature would be crucial. It concealed his numbers and protected his men from the full force of Napoleon's famous artillery. He also fortified 3 key farmhouses in front of his line. Hougoumont on the right, La Haye-Saint in the center, and Papelotte on the left. These farms would become mini-fortresses, drawing in thousands of French troops in desperate, bloody fighting throughout the day. The battle was supposed to start early in the morning, but heavy rain the night before had turned the ground into a muddy swamp. Napoleon decided to wait for the ground to dry. This delay was a critical mistake. It gave Blücher's Prussians precious extra hours to march and join the battle. Around 11:30 a.m., the first French cannon fired, signaling the start of the carnage. Napoleon's plan was twofold. First, create a diversionary attack on the farmhouse of Hougoumont to draw Wellington's reserves to the right flank. Then, unleash a massive infantry assault on Wellington's center-left. The fight for Hougoumont became a battle within a battle. What was meant to be a diversion turned into an all-day obsession for the French. Thousands of soldiers were sucked into the brutal, close-quarters combat around the chateau, its gardens and orchards. The defenders, a small contingent of British and German guards, held on with incredible bravery, at one point famously forcing shut the main gate against a wave of French soldiers who had broken in. This single act may have saved Wellington's entire flank. Meanwhile, the main French attack began. 80 cannons opened fire in a grand battery, pounding the Allied line. Then, nearly 20,000 French infantrymen, led by Marshal d'Erlon, marched forward in huge columns. It was a terrifying sight. They surged up the ridge, pushing back the Dutch and Belgian troops. For a moment, it looked like the Allied center would break, but Wellington was ready. He ordered his legendary British heavy cavalry, the Scots Greys and the Household Brigade, to charge. The cavalry charge was devastating. It smashed into the French infantry, scattering them in chaos. The Scots Greys, screaming, "Scotland forever," rode on, capturing French Eagle standards and even overrunning Napoleon's grand battery. But their success came at a terrible cost. They charged too far, became exhausted, and were counterattacked and decimated by French lancers. It was a moment of incredible glory and tragic loss. With his main infantry attack repulsed, Napoleon turned to his cavalry. He saw what he thought was a retreat in the Allied center. It was actually just troops moving back over the ridge for cover. He ordered Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, to lead a massive cavalry charge. What followed was one of the most famous and futile charges in military history. Over 12,000 French horsemen, wave after wave of armored cuirassiers and lancers, charged up the slope towards the Allied line. But Wellington's infantry wasn't running. They had formed into defensive squares. Imagine hollow boxes of men, 4 ranks deep, with bayonets pointing outwards. These squares were like bristling hedgehogs, almost impenetrable to cavalry. For hours, the French cavalry flowed around these squares like a tide around rocks. They couldn't break them. The cannons would blast holes in the squares. The cavalry would charge in, but the infantry would close ranks and stand firm. The ground became a horrific mix of mud, blood, and the bodies of thousands of men and horses. Marshal Ney himself had 5 horses shot from under him, but continued to fight on foot, a sword in his hand, a picture of desperate courage. While this cavalry epic was unfolding, the battle for the farmhouse of La House of La Haye Sainte in the center raged on. Finally, after a heroic defense, the German defenders ran out of ammunition, and the French captured the position. This was a major crisis for Wellington. With control of the farm, Napoleon could move his artillery forward and blast the Allied center at point-blank range. Wellington's line began to buckle. He was seen riding along the line, encouraging his men, telling them to hold hard. When asked for orders, he simply said, "There are no orders. Just hold your ground to the last man." The fate of the battle hung by a thread. And then, on the horizon to the east, new troops appeared. For a moment, both sides held their breath. Were they French reinforcements or the Prussians? It was Blucher. The Prussians had arrived. Napoleon was now fighting a battle on 2 fronts. He was forced to commit his last reserves, the Young Guard, to hold off the Prussians. But he had one final desperate card to play, the Imperial Guard, his elite, undefeated veterans. The Old Guard. As dusk began to fall, Napoleon personally sent them forward for one last push to break Wellington's center. They marched up the ridge in perfect formation, drums beating with an aura of invincibility. The entire Allied line braced for the final impact. Wellington gave a quiet order. "Now, Maitland, now's your time." His foot guards, who had been lying down behind the ridge to avoid cannon fire, stood up as one. They unleashed a volley at point-blank range that shattered the front of the Imperial Guard's column. A second brigade of guards hit them from the flank. For the first time in their history, the unthinkable happened. The Imperial Guard faltered. They stopped, they turned, and they ran. The cry went through the French ranks. "La Garde recule!" The Guard retreats. It was the psychological breaking point. Seeing their heroes flee, the entire French army dissolved into panic and chaos. Wellington, sensing the moment, stood in his stirrups and waved his hat in the air, the signal for a general advance. His entire line surged forward, sweeping the fleeing French from the field. The Prussian cavalry mercilessly pursued the broken army throughout the night, ensuring Napoleon's forces would never rally again. The Battle of Waterloo was over. It had been a near-run thing, as Wellington himself called it. The cost was immense. Over 45,000 men were killed or wounded in a single day. Napoleon abdicated 4 days later, his 100 days of renewed glory ending in total defeat. He would be exiled again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he would die 6 years later. The battle marked the end of over 2 decades of constant warfare in Europe and redrew the map of the continent for the next century. It was a brutal, bloody, and decisive day that ended an emperor's ambition and defined an era. Thanks for watching. If you found this story of courage, strategy, and sheer determination as fascinating as I do, Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most epic moments. Let me know in the comments which battle you'd like to see covered next. See you in the next video.